to see all of you. This is our first in-person town hall since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really thrilling to have the opportunity to be in community in person with you all. As we begin this conversation tonight, I just want to reiterate why these town hall events are so important to me. Co-governance is something that we ran on and is one of the core values our office has, and it shapes our work every single day. I fundamentally believe my success in Congress is contingent upon inviting members of our community to come along this journey through conversations in roundtables, in town halls, and community events. All of these conversations have directly guided my legislative priorities in Washington. So I would love to give you guys some really quick updates on the things that we have been up to, and then introduce two of my colleagues to tell you about some important work we've been doing together, and then transition us quickly so that I can take as many questions as possible and hopefully get you all home in time to have dinner for those of you who haven't had dinner yet. Earlier this summer, we advanced $14.4 million in funding for 10 community projects that we submitted in the spring. These 10 projects invest in communities that were hit the hardest by both the pandemic and the social unrest in the past year. They address joblessness, the food desert, housing insecurity, and access to healthcare. These projects that we included to ask for funding include rebuilding the Hennepin Healthcare Clinic on East Lake Street, skills training for clear energy careers, sprinkler updates for the Minnesota Public Housing Authority, funding for Minneapolis American Indian Center, new workforce training in South Minneapolis, food business incubator at Northside Economic Opportunity Network, new recreation building in North Commons Park, clean energy training in North Minneapolis, updates to Sapatony Community Center, Brooklyn Center Health Initiative, and funding for Wadek Community Apartments in Seward. These projects still need to go through the Senate as they have passed in the House, and we will continue to keep fighting for more dollars to come into our district. I know that, like most of you, it's been really heartbreaking to see the immense human tragedy in Afghanistan. In this critical moment, we must draw upon the best of our history and open our arms to those seeking the opportunities that many of us in this country have been given. We must, as President Joe Biden said during his presidential campaign, never turn our backs on those who are, or that which makes us uniquely and proudly American. Our office has been doing everything we can to get those who are at risk out of harm's way. This commitment does not end with our military withdrawal. In fact, it is more important now than ever. Many people who are fleeing Afghanistan are doing so because of their service to our country and their commitment to our common value. Just as we mourn the loss of the 13 brave men and women with the US military who were killed last week, we should also mourn the loss of the children and families who've been killed days ago by the US drone strike. The cost of war, which I personally know is immense, and the tragedy of the last 2 weeks should be a stark reminder of why we should never start a war or why wars are never the answer. We must remember that human life is never replaceable. These values drive my work in Congress, and I will always be a devoted advocate for peace and diplomacy, which is why last month I reintroduced two bills included in my Pathway to Peace legislation package: the Stop Arming Human Rights Abuses Act, which we call the SARA Act, and the Global Migration Agreement Act. Pathway to Peace outlines a bold, progressive vision to rethink the country's approach to foreign policy by centering human rights, justice, and peace as pillars of America's engagement in the world and making military action a last resort. The Stop Arming Human Rights Abuses Act imposes universal rights and humanitarian conditions on security cooperations with the United States. The bill establishes red lines based on internationally recognized gross violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. The Global Migration Agreement Act lays out a long-term vision for America's leadership on tackling the global migration crisis. It instructs the State Department and our UN ambassador to take the lead on creating a binding international migration agreement, which is similar to what we just did in Afghanistan. This proposal acknowledges the significance of current resources that are forcing displacement and unfair burden in countries like Sudan, Colombia, Niger, Jordan, Bangladesh, and the particular vulnerabilities of women, girls, the LGBTQ community, and other minorities. People are fleeing their countries to seek safety, and every country has a role to play in addressing the root causes. There needs to be a place along the migrant trail to protect vulnerable migrants. And there needs to be countries where people arrive and have guaranteed human rights. These bills are essential for putting human rights at the center of US foreign policy. Next, I'd like to tell you about some of the other bills that we have recently introduced. Last month, I introduced the Support Act and the GPI Act. The Sending Unconditional Payment to People Overcoming Resistance to Trump Act, the Support Act, will create a guaranteed income program for up to $1,200 per month for adults and $600 for kids, following a pilot program in localities nationwide. The Genuine Progress Indicator Act will provide an alternative economic metric to supplement GDP calculations and revamp our economic policy lenses by including outlook, socioeconomic and environmental costs and benefits of economic productivity. I mentioned earlier that my commitment to co-governance. The idea for this bill came from one of our constituents, Ken Petal, who came to my staff with the idea and kickstarted our work on this effort. So join me in thanking Ken. I know many of you have been following this, and as you've heard in the news, Congress is working on the latest infrastructure package in American history, and the largest infrastructure package in American history. Throughout these processes, I'm doing everything that I can to bring home much needed infrastructure dollars for our district. This summer, we were able to advance funding for 4 transportation projects in the 5th Congressional District totaling $32.5 million. These provisions passed as part of the Invest in America Act, the House's Surface Transportation Bill. The projects include $5 million for the Metro F line from downtown Minneapolis to Fridley, $4.5 million for the Metro E line between the University of Minnesota and Edina, and $3 million for the Cedar Seward pedestrian bridge at I-94. The package would also provide over $20 million for the Metro Blue Line Extension Light Rail Transportation Project, which will extend the existing Blue Line LRT from Target Field Station northwest to Brooklyn Park and connect communities along the way. The Invest in America Act makes transformative investment in America's infrastructure, creates millions of jobs, advancing bold action on our climate crisis, invests in affordable housing, and expands affordable high-speed internet across the country. This legislation invests in underserved communities and addresses long-standing disparities on many fronts. I'm glad this package includes my provision to address long-standing disparities and invests resources to help future generations thrive. While Congress is working on these bills, we can't allow structural infrastructure to compete with human infrastructure in Congress. So we must invest in both. We made a promise to the American people that we are going to have a package that fully meets the moment and addresses the dire investments that our country needs and has neglected far too long. I will continue to push for both the bipartisan bill and the reconciliation budget bill together to ensure that we are not prioritizing one over the other. Now I would like to say a few words about our casework. I know some of you in the audience have already worked with our office on casework. It is one of the least known but most important service my office provides to constituents. Whenever you are experiencing an issue with government, my staff can submit an inquiry on your behalf and liaison with any federal agency. Some of the situations that we can help with are immigration delays, pending small business loans, child tax credit payments and stimulus payments that you might not have gotten, Social Security issues, expediting passports. If you have a current concern or if you aren't sure if your issue is something that we can help with, please find one of my staff members, if you guys would wave across the room to help get you started once we are done. Throughout the last 18 months of the pandemic, my team's work has looked very different than it typically does. I'm someone who believes challenges can bring about opportunity. The challenge of remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic brought an opportunity for us to convene community leaders virtually to tackle pressing issues in our community, including regular roundtables with the Indigenous community, the Latinx community, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and African American leaders, mayors and city councils of every single municipality that I represent, and the creation of our Green New Deal Task Force and Housing Task Force. I am glad to say that the co-chairs of these task forces are here with us today, and I want to invite them to say a few words about the work that we have been able to do together. First, I'm going to introduce Representative Frank Hornstein, who co-chairs the Green New Deal Task Force. Frank?
good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to this town hall meeting. I want to thank Congresswoman Omar for holding it and for including myself and Representative Howard and the work that we're doing to support you and really integrate that work you were talking about, Congressman, from the local level to the state level to the federal level, and incorporating citizens in all of that work. And that's what this Green New Deal task force that we started earlier this year is all about. And so what we have done is brought together a number of people, elected officials, local and state, but many, many citizens from a cross-section of different interests. And we have people with policy expertise. We also have a lot of folks who are active on the ground, grassroots organizers. And what's so important right now about the Green New Deal, and Congressman Omar, thank you for your leadership on infrastructure and mentioning that in your opening comments. We need right now to take bold action on climate. If there was ever a summer that proved it, it's this summer. Fires, intensifying hurricanes, flooding, climate change is upon us, it is costing us. We need to build the infrastructure to address it, to prevent it, and to increase our ability to act with resilience to stem the impacts of it. We do that by creating good, paying union jobs to address climate justice. That's what the Green New Deal is all about. And just one last thing before I get into a couple of the items we're working on in the task force. Again, thank you, Congresswoman, and your leadership in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The CPC, along with Senator Sanders and others, did have a bold vision for infrastructure. That historic investment you talked about wouldn't have happened without the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Senator Sanders, and the grassroots organizing that went into it. That's why we have that historical investment. And as you mentioned, that investment will have real impacts on lives of people in the 5th CD. We, in the transportation bill that was just passed in the Minnesota House, we provided the state share of funding for the E-line, which you talked about. And so thank you for prioritizing that on the federal level. That will really make a difference in people's lives. For mobility, for climate, for access to jobs, people with disabilities, so many people will benefit from that excellent bus service provided by the E-line. So a couple of things we've worked on already on the Green New Deal Task Force. Congresswoman Omar has introduced the End Polluter Welfare Act. You know, there's $15 billion of subsidies go to the fossil fuel industry. That's not right. And this legislation addresses that issue and will deal with it. And so members of the Green New Deal Task Force, when this bill was introduced, made phone calls, wrote letters, got active, and that's the kind of collaboration and support we can offer for good public policy in Washington, D.C. And so, we will continue to work. I think our next project is really going to be to provide that support for the infrastructure bill. We've got to get that infrastructure bill passed and the human services bill passed as well. And so, there's a lot of good stuff happening this fall, and we will continue to collaborate with you. Thank you so much for your leadership on climate, on transportation, so many issues near and dear to my heart. Those are just two of them, but there's many others. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Chairman Hornstein, for your leadership on transportation and the environment. Next, I'd like to welcome Representative Mike Howard, who co-chairs our Housing Task Force.
Good evening. My name is Mike Howard, and I represent Richfield and Bloomington in the Minnesota House and serve as the vice chair of our housing committee. And as we've heard a little bit already, I mean, this last year and a half has been beyond difficult for our constituents, for Minnesotans. And in the area of housing, we had a housing crisis before this global pandemic. And I can tell you, I appreciated as a state representative working on housing every day that we had a congresswoman who was fighting for the big solutions that are necessary to truly address our housing crisis at the state and national level. But what I want to share about our housing task force that was created is really a model of co-governance, of bringing elements together, working on an issue that I haven't seen present before. And it was so refreshing to have a conversation with Ilhan and to hear questions about what are we doing at the state level, not just sort of filtering down, here's what's happening at the federal level, a true desire to get in the weeds, and figure out what we can do to make sure that we keep people housed throughout this pandemic. And that's really where the work of our housing task force began. And the mission was, we want to make sure that people stay. If we're asking people to stay in their homes, to stay safe, we better make sure they can afford the roof over their heads. And that really has been the guiding work of a task force that includes housing advocates, housing providers, community activists, elected officials at the local, state, members of our executive branch, and Ilhan and her amazing staff working together, pulling together. And in particular, I want to share a little bit of the work of this task force related to the eviction moratorium. You may have seen that the United States Supreme Court recently, wrongly I would add, struck down the national eviction moratorium. Thankfully, here in Minnesota, renters have stronger protections that last well into next year to prevent their evictions. And that is a credit to the work, the collaborative work of our housing task force. In Minnesota, right now, we have an eviction moratorium still in place that will off-ramp later this fall. But importantly, as part of our off-ramp, if a renter has an open application for rental assistance, they cannot face an eviction until June of next year. That gives us basically a year off-ramp to make sure that we're utilizing the more than $500 million of rental assistance that was provided by Congress. Thank you very much for all of the members of Congress and President Biden voting for those resources. Over $500 million that we're putting in the hands of renters and landlords to make sure that everyone that was impacted by this pandemic through no fault of their own are made whole. And what I appreciate about this task force as well is that it's not a group that wants to rest on its laurels. As I mentioned, we faced a housing crisis before the pandemic began, and making sure that we're keeping people safe in their homes and not facing evictions in a way that feels like the tip of the iceberg or the first part of the problem. But as we know, the challenges are so immense. We need to be building more affordable housing. We need to be preserving the housing that we do have. We need to be providing stronger protection for our renters. And I believe that we'll be stronger at achieving those results when we have the kinds of collaborative work like we've seen in our task force. Local, state, national, our community, all pulling together in the same direction. And so I'm grateful for where we've come and know that we've got a lot more work to do in housing. And so it's great to be here tonight outdoors and see a whole bunch of folks and enjoy this weather.
Thank you, Chairman Howard. It is really exciting to have people that are eager to work on tackling some of the persistent problems in our society in housing, transportation, and infrastructure. And our environment have been that. And so I'm just really grateful for Frank and Mike for being, my brothers in this work of trying to provide on behalf of our constituents. With that, we're going to take some questions. I think we have a holiday up there that will come around. And if you have a question, raise your hand.
Hi, Representative Omar. So I really appreciate the work you're doing and Frank's doing with the Green New Deal project. And I've got a sign here that says, I think this dovetails well with that project, is that putting a price on carbon is something that will create a market for those green jobs that Frank was talking about. So Representative Omar, where do you stand on putting a price on carbon dioxide?
I mean, that is something that we can have a deeper conversation about. I just haven't seen how right now that would be beneficial for us to be doing that instead of moving some of the other pieces of legislation that we've been advocating for. But I would love to chat with you all afterwards to see why you think that would be something that we should prioritize.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name's Lucas. I live in Minneapolis. I'm a member of the construction union.
Can you move the mic from him so that you can actually hear him?
Okay. So I'm a member of the Laborers Construction Union. We build a lot of infrastructure, and we're incredibly excited about the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's going to mean upwards of $6 billion invested in Minnesota, from broadband to public transit. So we're excited. We want it to get done. I'm also extremely worried that it could get caught up in the partisan debates when we tie it to the larger budget bill, and I'm worried that could sink it. I really don't want that to happen because I think we've got something incredible in our grasp. And I'm just wondering what you will do to make sure that it passes and then it gets to President Biden's desk. And thank you for the time.
Thank you. I am pretty optimistic that this piece of legislation is going to pass. It has brought support in our caucus, and it has brought support in the Senate. I don't think that it is, something that has the risk of failing. There is right now a real opportunity for the first time, I would say, in my lifetime and in the lifetimes of people in this room, that we can actually get real investment, not just in standard infrastructure, but in human infrastructure as well. And I don't think we should waste that opportunity. The president campaigned on a Build Back Better agenda. That Build Back Better agenda includes both what's in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it includes what we are trying to put into the reconciliation budget. And combined is what we need in order to be able to deliver on that agenda. And I think we should give the president the opportunity to have his full agenda enacted. As you know, we've been having conversations about trying to create actual timelines when these votes can take place. Now, it just means that we have to work faster once we get back. And I feel very optimistic that both of those things are going to happen, and we will have the full package enact. You gotta be fair, you gotta go on there.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Amy, and thank you, Congressman Omar. Paid family medical leave is extremely popular. It's stalled here in
sorry, Amy, what's wrong with the mic? Nicole? Oh,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Paid medical leave. I can talk about paid medical leave. Paid medical leave is an issue now at the federal level, and I'm very excited that it is. Could you please address this because it's extremely popular, and it's,
thank you, Amy. Amy's question or comment was that paid family leave is now a very popular position and proposal, and you're right, Amy. That is very true. The Progressive Caucus put together 5 priorities of things that we wanted to see as part of the reconciliation budget, and that was our number one, right? To have a care economy and to make sure our families are being invested in was always a priority for the Progressive Caucus. Now it's a priority for everyone, and I think it's going to be one of those that actually gets the real investment that it deserves. Right now, a lot of our conversations have been, how much money we're going to put in each of these priorities, and it's a continued conversation. But the fact that paid family leave is a priority, and it's one that is getting addressed, is a testament to all of you who have advocated for so many years. I remember when I was in the Minnesota House, that was a big deal to be able to advocate for that and to do that. And now that it's this close to getting done on a federal level, really is a testament to the people who haven't allowed for that policy proposal to die. And so, a lot of our colleagues on the Senate side have been the champions of this proposal. And Chairwoman Rosa DeLaura, this is her baby, this is her bill, and I just look forward to getting the opportunity to see it be included and funded. Equality.
Considering how effective congressional progressive Democrats are running crafty this bold and substantive reconciliation with, through the power of holding the vote and finally using the power, not just don't use the power, but using the power to hold your vote and say, hey, we're not going to go on this bill unless it is a substantive concern. Do you see the congressional progressive Democrats or broadly using this technique as a more consistent strategy for setting issues like healthcare, water protections, justice for Nazis? So with overall questions, do you guys see yourself using the power of the courts to push substantive policies?
So I don't know if you know this, but I serve as the whip for the Progressive Caucus. And so my job and in that role is to figure out where the votes are within our caucus for any of the policy ideas that we're going to push for. And in many ways that is sort of the ways in which we decide what is going to be a priority in communicating to the larger caucus. We continue to whip on some of these issues, and we don't have the numbers for them. And so you cannot threaten to do something that you don't have the power to do. And until we have the numbers and the ability that, like we just did, to be able to do that, we can't. So help us get more progressives into Congress and help us grow our caucus. in the purple? That is you, right? I'm good. So it was hard to hear you, but I will just repeat and let me know if I got what you were asking. It is hard for Black and Brown, Indigenous small businesses to be able to get resources from DEED, and you're wondering if our office can liaison and help create a space where you all can have a conversation with DEED to try to get some of those resources directly into these communities. Of course we can. We actually, when the pandemic first began, March of 2020, were the only office, and I think we still are the only office, to create a person to liaison with DEED so that we can help businesses get access to the resources that were coming from the CARES Act. As you know, Felicia, and I don't know if everybody knows this, the only agencies we are allowed to liaison with is federal agency. So we often do not do liaison work with state agencies. But for this one, we thought it was really important because we were seeing, people struggling in our community to get the resources they were owed through DEED and some of the other state agencies. And so I'll have somebody follow up from our office to make sure that we are addressing this need that you are seeing. Earlier today, I was on a panel with Attorney General Keith Ellison and Tina Smith with NEON, and what we were hearing from the executive director of NEON, Mr. Warren, was that some of the money, even now, that came through the American Rescue Program, that now that DEED is releasing the money, they are saying you have to, with 10 days, within 10, you can only apply within 10 days. And so we know many of these small businesses in our communities, they don't have, or even nonprofits and others that would qualify for some of these resources, they don't have people who in-house who write grants. They don't have people in-house who are business managers and can process these things for them. Sometimes it's just one or two people, and to be able to hear it and have your application ready and processed within 10 days is likely not going to happen. And this is why we see disparities in these resources oftentimes, because businesses that are established oftentimes will have access to these resources because they can get to it. And businesses like the ones that you help in West Broadway, it's hard for them to have the resources that they need. And so thank you for bringing that up, and we will do whatever it is that we can do within the legal limits to be able to do that with you.
My name is Sergio Rivera, and I'm a Corvette and access to Afghanistan Withdrawal. So I'm very proud of having people. I also came from an immigrant community myself, and I've been trying to help out the ways that I can. And I've noticed a couple of issues that I haven't seen get addressed when I've heard from my connections in the nonprofit community and the investment community. The first is, it seems like a lot of Saudis, a lot of Afghans are trying to come over here for refugees that aren't actually able to come because they think that their families over to the United States. And my answer is that that's something to do with the complicated refugee application program and getting permission to enter. The second thing that I also heard a lot is that a lot of these Afghans that are coming back to the United States, a lot of them are U.S. citizens and U.S. residents, so they don't qualify for refugee assistance, even though they've been living in Afghanistan for the past 10 to 20 years and pretty much lost everything. So what are we doing to help the people that are left behind who can leave and their families who can leave? And is there anything that we're doing to help out people who need help but can't qualify for it because of, I guess, federal data?
One, thank you for your service. It's been really challenging to try to get full understanding of the who's included in the number of people who've been evacuated, right? We think it's really important that over 120,000 people have been evacuated in 2.5 weeks. That's miraculous. As someone who knows just the challenges of trying to escape a situation like many were escaping in Afghanistan. We've evacuated also 6,000 American nationals, some who are, as you say, Afghan Americans. There are, we have one constituent who was an elder man, and he didn't want to be evacuated without his adult children, and there's some complications in trying to create the paperwork that is necessary for that to happen, because in family reunification, the way our current system is set up, you can't apply for reunification for some members of your family in certain classes, right? The other thing that we are seeing that I am extremely panicked about, and I've been having a lot of conversations, not just with the state, but with Speaker Pelosi and appropriators on the Appropriations Committee, is we airlifted a lot of people. A lot of these people are going to go into military installations in the United States or abroad. But as you know, the airbase in Qatar or here in Wisconsin, that it's considered American soil, right? Because it's American airbase. And my worry is that refugee is categorically someone who gets a refugee resettlement, not just someone who's escaping, right? And is like sort of fits into the category of being refugee. But in the United States, the only people that are refugees are people who have received refugee resettlement. And those are the only people who qualify for resources under our refugee resettlement programs. So if you have somebody who is airlifted from Afghanistan who is in a military base in Qatar or in the United States, they are going to be considered asylum seekers, right? Like people just coming to our border because we are their first country of entry. So they are not going to be much different than the people at our border in the southern border. And if you seek asylum, when you come into a country, obviously internationally, you have a right to seek asylum and make your case, but you don't get resources as part of the refugee resettlement. And we are going to have a lot of people who are going to arrive in our country who are going to be in situations like you are if you are a refugee in Lebanon, or you're a refugee in Turkey, or as I was a refugee in Kenya, where you are a refugee, but in the United States, you don't have the ability to have those resettlement resources. And that's very problematic for people who are trying to get acclimated into life here. And so trying to find a way to create that category for them so that they can qualify for some of these programs has been challenging because it's new to us. We haven't, right? Like we're not a host country. We have never been a host refugee country. We've always been a resettlement country. And that's where the vetting challenges are. That's where the categorization challenges are. And it's a new problem that's going to take some time for us to figure out. Now, the other piece to your question is what happens with people who are left, who are trying to leave. And, we received a lot of those cases. People who either couldn't get to the airport, or people who chose to stay because they didn't want to leave their vulnerable families behind. And we will continue to work on those cases. It is promising that the administration says our withdrawal doesn't mean the end, right, of our ability to get people out. And so we will hold them accountable for that and continue to push for that. I recently wrote an op-ed, it was published in CNN, talking about why it was important for us to take in refugees. Talked about some of the changes that we have to make in regards to policy that a lot of people haven't been thinking about. And we also talked about how we have to lift the cap, because even if we classified some of these people as refugees, that means we can't let them enter the country because we haven't allocated enough resources. And so we're asking for the cap to be lifted and for it to be increased to 200,000. That is still a lot less than what Reagan allowed in. And so we'll just continue to push for that. But again, thank you for your service and thank you for caring and raising this issue. Yes. Yeah, let's.
Will you need to talk very loud into the mic for it to continue?
I can't hear you. Are you referencing the money that we're talking about for the reconciliation package? Okay, so actually that's a really good point, because what we envision is going to be the hiccup and the thing that we have to work out. We currently don't have a childcare system that is like the one that we are hoping to create, right? Where families will not pay more than 7% of their income for childcare. We currently don't have a system where there is a certain amount that childcare workers have to get paid, and so even when we do pass the reconciliation bill, not if, when we pass the bill, it is going to take a long time. I think we're saying a year and a half before it gets implemented, because it's a whole system that we have to build. And I would love to hear, from experience, some of the ideas that you have and things that we should be thinking about in regards to building that. For me, at least, what I care about, what I want to make sure is that it is not going to be a means tested one for families, because just making sure that it's universal and nobody pays more than 7% of their income for childcare should be enough. And right now, Katie Porter and others, including myself, are having a conversation about the age children should be covered in this childcare program. There's a lot of us who are mothers of children. I have 3 biologically and 4 kids, and it is, like you said, it's very expensive. It's hard. Different states have different rules about how old a child has to be in order for them to be left home alone. And so creating a program that is universal, that has standardized policies throughout it, would also be really helpful to a lot of families. We can take a few. There are some, whoa, okay. There are 2 hands up there. Take them together, and then we'll do those 2 together. How about that?
The economic crisis has been here
conservation in Minneapolis, carjackings are rampant, and the number, especially at border runs is increasing. 3 black children shot in Minneapolis, and carjackings is not even good. Crime is just absolutely out of control.
Do you regret that statement? And do you still believe the Minneapolis Police Department should be dismantled? And do you support the charter amendment that would enable the city council to do that, that Representative colleague Andrew Craig spoke out against?
Let me do these three. For the two bills, I think I'm on for sure one of the bills. I'm not positive about. The second, somebody in my office will check to see if I'm co-authoring those pieces of legislation. They sound familiar to me, but I'm not 100%. And I will say, I mean, a part of our push to have the reconciliation budget pass in simultaneously with the bipartisan piece of legislation, bipartisan infrastructure, is that to make sure that we are funding our care economy, that we are prioritizing our families, that we are, doing something significant about climate, that we are not wasting this once in a lifetime opportunity that we have to make real progress in some of these policies that we have been advocating for a really long time. Again, trying to find the space where you can push without having complete collapse of getting anything is the role that I play in the Progressive Caucus, right? We have to try to make sure we have enough votes in order to be able to pass anything. If I were to say, I'm not voting for the reconciliation bill, I'm not voting for the infrastructure bill unless it has A, B, and C, that's half, more than half of my constituents not getting some of the things that they want to see implemented, right? And so I get the need to say, like, burn it all down, but burn it all down does not serve, the 700,000 people that I represent that send me to Congress to be an individual voice for all of them. And so trying to see what we can move and what we should be opposing is part of that work. I just wrote an op-ed in the Star Tribune, so you take a look at that. I obviously support the amendment. I ask everybody to vote yes for this amendment. This is once in a lifetime opportunity for us to get rid of a charter that has created hindrance, for us to have the kind of progress and real developments in our city. And once we get rid of it, we can have a conversation on what we should be doing about public safety to make sure every single person in our community feels safe. We'll do these two and then call it a night. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Representative. I just want to thank you for your work last week. Push for the reconciliation. And I want to ask if you will commit to push for working to have reconciliation cover dental, vision, hearing, but at the same time, not sacrificing lower and permanent Medicare coverage. I've been a single mom for 20 years now. I've been able to afford coverage. That's going to help a little bit serious. But I like to use behind to thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Ilhan. I'm a constituent from South Minneapolis, and I just want to thank you for your leadership when it comes to pushing for
keeping a line in terms of the reconciliation package and the infrastructure bill. And what I wanted to know is there's going to be a lot of tension among Congress to move back from that line. And so I'm curious, how can we as your constituents support your leadership? And how can we support other members of Congress of keeping that line in the coming months?
Let's take the question from the man with the sign up there.
Representative Omar, I just wanted to say that because of your strong voice for the people, you were able to defeat the super funded candidate that opposed you in the last election. I think your voice for the people's needs is going to help defeat the next bozo that they run against you with all the money that they can give that person. I'd like to see not only the charter that we're going to go by in Minneapolis go through so that people have a voice in public safety, we should extend that to our foreign policy. As a member of the House Foreign Relations Committee, we need to defund the military. We need to have a voice in that undemocratic, money-voted military-industrial complex that has taken over our government and has used their lies, their murder, their deceit, their assassinations against their own people, us Americans, in keeping us from getting what we need. Healthcare for all, education, free education for all, guaranteed housing for all, combat climate change. How can you use your voice? I know that as member, one of the largest offices in the Democratic Party, that you have no power in, you think because small caucuses like the Freedom Republican caucus and the Blue caucus, with almost less than a dozen, have gotten their say. So, what can you do? How can we support you? We want to run with your office.
So Chairman Sanders's reconciliation budget outline does include dental, hearing, and vision. And it does ask for the age to be lowered to 55 for eligibility. We've also introduced a standalone piece of legislation to make sure that that happens. It is going to be one of the things that we are going to push for. It was one of the 5 priorities that we organized around as a caucus, the Progressive Caucus, in sending our priorities to both Biden, Schumer, and Speaker Pelosi. And it's one of the reasons that we have this strategy of having, right, like the 2 pieces of legislation go together, be their strategy, because we've been pushing for it for 5 months, and we were able to sell that strategy, and it's the strategy that the Democratic caucus is using at the moment. So we'll continue to push. Thank you for adding your voice. Obviously, anything that you all can do to send, letters supporting our efforts, anything that you do in communicating with other offices that represent Minnesota in the delegation to say, we support the Congresswoman's push for these pieces of legislation is helpful in the conversations that we have. We certainly, the military-industrial complex is not the only one that sort of manipulates the American public and sets us up to invest in things that are not actually beneficial to us. But in so many ways, the media apparatus, right, like drafts a narrative that makes it that when you are talking about policies like Medicare for all, when you're talking about policies like canceling student debt, when you're talking about policies of ending homelessness, when you are talking about policies that center our humanity and dignity and safety in not just in foreign policy, but in public safety policies here domestically, they label you radical. Right? They say everything you are fighting for is controversial. But when you have people who are pushing for policies that get us into war, you know, that create economic blockade on countries that ultimately starve them and create a humanitarian crisis, or when you're advocating for corporate give-outs, they don't say that person is radical. They don't say that person has a controversial, you know, point of view. They don't demonize them, right? Like they celebrate them. They say, oh, this is like a centrist idea. This is mainstream. This is, you know, this is somebody who's listening to everybody in their constituency. When in reality, every policy that I advocate for has 70%, 80%, 90% approval from the American constituency, regardless of whether they are Republican or Democrat or independent. And so it is important for all of us to continue to speak out on the fact that we are in these narratives being disproportionately represented, right? The American public is supporting the Build Back Better agenda. They don't just want an infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure. They want both of these packages to pass. They want these real bold investments to happen in our country. And in order for our colleagues to continue to believe that and push for that, they have to hear it from their constituents. They have to hear from their constituents. They have to hear from their constituents, because ultimately we work for you and we serve you. And some of us have a value base that is grounded in advancing policies on behalf of working people. Not everybody does that. But we listen to our constituents. And if our constituents are loud enough, they change our point of view on particular policies. And so tell your friends who are represented by people other than me to talk to their representatives to support our strategy to get the Build Back Better agenda passed together. Thank you all for having me. Again.